everybody. Welcome to the Thought Sparks podcast. I'm Rita McGrath, and I am absolutely delighted to be welcomed today by my friend, collaborator, sometime Thought Spar, Martin Reeves, who is with the BCG Henderson Institute. He's one of their major thought leaders at the Boston Consulting Group, and he has this wonderful new book out called The Like, the Button That Changed the World. And I'm just in its honor, I put on the closest color I could get to the cover. So Martin, welcome. It's delightful to see you again.
Thanks. Nice to see you again, Rita.
Absolutely. So there's lots and lots we could talk about, but I thought let's start with the book. And what prompted you to write a whole book about this?
Yeah, it is an unusual thing to do because you're probably not given a thought to the thumbs up symbol. But actually, it had a profound impact, of course, because it's used, depending on how you define like, it's used between 7 and 100 billion times a day around the world. And, especially if I look at my kids, it defines how they relate to each other. It sort of somehow defines their status amongst peers. It changes how we communicate. It's a grammatical innovation, if you will. It's changes how we create. My daughter said to me when I sort of asked her, not to spend too much time online, she said, "But do you know what I'm doing online? I'm running multi-director animation." She was orchestrating a virtual animation project with people around the world. So it's democratized creativity, changes how we transact. And the reason that we probably haven't thought about it is that, of course, it's an ancient gesture. The point is that there's precisely nothing new about this familiar gesture, but of course, behind the scenes, it's a bunch of JavaScript code. So it is an innovation. So that just seemed fascinating to me. And as I dug into the story with my co-author, it was just too fascinating to leave alone.
Well, I love the way that you cite, you set the button in the context of, history, innovation. And one example from the book that I thought was particularly interesting was this painting, I guess, that was done of the combatants in the Colosseum.
Yes.
And then, the popular myth is that, I guess it would be the emperor would signal whether the vanquished would survive or be terminated with a thumbs up or thumbs down button. And you said that isn't exactly correct.
It isn't exactly true. And no, that's a great question. So as we dug into the like button, one question was why the thumbs up symbol? And people think they know the answer to that. It's because it's a familiar gesture. And where does it come from? It comes from the Roman Colosseum. But it's not actually quite true. So what is true, of course, is that gestural language probably preceded spoken language, and it's very ancient. And not surprisingly, we're obsessed with faces, our identity, and hands, our agency. And so this gesture has been recycled throughout history. But we think it was the audience of the Colosseum watching the gladiators fight that signaled to the emperor whether the fallen gladiator should be terminated or not. And there was a famous painting in the 1870s that became very popular in the US, and it was a painting of a gladiatorial scene, and the Vestal Virgins are giving the thumbs down symbol. And but it's thought to be a deliberate distortion for dramatic effect. There probably wasn't a thumbs up and a thumbs down gesture. Probably what there was a sheathed sword gesture, the thumb tucked inside the fist, and a thumb pointing towards the gladiator, an unsheathed sword gesture, which meant termination. And but of course, in language, whatever is thought to be true becomes a fact. And so this gesture became embedded in language and in America, and was actually further reinforced when Ridley Scott did his film Gladiator 1, which was about battles in the Colosseum, and he was said to probably not have taken on that film had he not been shown this very same painting. But the drama of it actually convinced him. to create the film. And this film came out in 2000, which is precisely the time that the programmers in Silicon Valley reached for a symbol for this digital feedback that was going to be part of Web 2.0, the social web. And so the story of the thumbs up gesture and why it was on the mind of the programmers is an interesting sort of aspect of the story we tell.
Yeah, and those would be the sort of people who would be watching movies like Gladiator, of course.
Exactly, and we don't have time to go into all of the details, but it's a fascinating story because it wasn't just the painting; it was the fact that the painter married the daughter of a sort of an art mogul who had perfected the technology of cheap, high-quality reproductions of paintings called Mr. Goupil. And so the early America at that time was flooded with with reproductions of classical paintings. And furthermore, there was a preacher about the same time that has been a little bit forgotten by history, but he was probably one of the most charismatic religious preachers in history, a guy called the Reverend Talmage, who even in the 1880s had a franchise of 35 million people reading his sermons weekly. Essentially, his sermons were republished in regional newspapers. And he was an art collector. He was familiar with the painting. And his favorite analogy was thumbs up or thumbs down, thumbs up or thumbs down to this particular Christian value. So it was, massively established in the American psyche, even though it wasn't strictly true.
I love it. Well, I love the story of the cheap painting reproduction because it reminds me of something Scott Anthony talks about, which is that what is disruption? It's something that takes something that was really complicated to do and makes it simple,
right.
And it takes something that's really expensive and makes it affordable to large masses of people. And it strikes me that painting falls in that category, hence its popularity.
Well, in multiple ways, really. I mean, you've got the painting, which is the sort of a communication technology, if you will. And you also have just the whole business of feedback. I mean, what does the like button do? It provides digital feedback to encourage people to submit content on social media, and that was a new thing at the time. The social web was born in about 2000. But before that, what did feedback mean? It meant a Nielsen set-top box on top of your television, and that could tell you whether the TV was on and tuned to channel 36 or not. It couldn't tell you whether people were watching it or whether they were in the kitchen making tea. It couldn't tell you whether they loved it or hated it. Or it put them to sleep. It just told you that the TV was on channel 36. So this was a much cheaper feedback mechanism. And then another aspect of what you're referring to is the familiarity of the icon, because that's quite interesting in innovation terms. Often we think that innovation is about conspicuous novelty, lots of features that you've never heard of before. But there was actually a very influential book that came out in 2000 when all this was happening, called Don't Make Me Think. And it was about the opposite idea. It was about the idea that if you really wanted an idea to be extremely popular, then you're better off not stressing its novelty, but by making it look so familiar that it doesn't require an instruction manual. And of course, nobody required an instruction manual for the thumbs up gesture. So it's sort of hiding the novelty. And I think in innovation, which we're both interested in, you always have a choice about there's the invention itself and there's how you frame it. Do you frame it as, let me explain to you what this thing does, a facsimile machine? Or do you frame it as, this is entirely novel, this is going to change everything, you've never seen this before? Or do you frame it as actually something highly familiar, like the Apple Watch? The Apple Watch is not a watch, it's a supercomputer on your wrist, but if you call it a watch, it just feels much more familiar. We feel like we know what to do with it. So I think that's a very interesting aspect for me.
It is. Well, and it's also related to this idea of creating categories. And I think new category creation is really difficult. I think we as humans tend to march from familiar analogy to familiar analogy, and so many successful innovations are it's one of the most, I guess, famous ones in recent history. It's the Uber of you name it. Mm-hmm. People understand what Uber is, and so it becomes easy for them to understand what these other technologies are.
Absolutely. So communications is sometimes regarded as the as not part of strategy or the most frivolous aspect of strategy, but actually how you name and frame something is essential to its success. I think that communications and naming and framing are some of the most strategic things we do with our new shiny objects.
I would absolutely agree. So what did this exploration into light, did you learn a lot about where innovations come from and how they emerge?
Well, I'd long been suspicious of heroic stories of innovation. So I'd done some work with the London Institute of Mathematical Sciences on the mathematics of innovation. Like, if you look at, for instance, software packages, how do they, because they get incorporated into each other and then become a new thing. And I looked at like the history of software, and it seemed to be like a highly chaotic process, and very much unlike the stories of heroic inventors like a sort of Faraday and Sir Humphrey Davy, sort of having a well-described problem, a clear vision of the solution, a moment of inspiration, and then one person solves the problem. I'd been highly suspicious of these sorts of stories, and so as we dug into the like story, I was quite interested to see what is the pattern here. And you could say that my 3 years with my co-author sort of digging into this, because we got really fascinated. We probably could have been done in a year, but we just sort of carried on. And one of the most curious things is it's very hard for us to say we invented the like button, even after 3 years of research, because there were many forgotten heroes and many unwitting contributors, because the entire sort of Web 2.0 community was facing a similar set of problems at the time. Things like, how to rank content without triggering a page refresh. Remember the days of the dial-up internet? The last thing you wanted to do was lose the users by having a page refresh. There was encouraging users to submit new content. There was prioritizing content in a content feed, and these things needed new approaches. And we found about 50 companies that actually contributed to some small aspect of the like button. Furthermore, none of them foresaw the eventual biggest economic use of the like button. The biggest economic use of the like button was as the key to turning social media from a hobby into a business, because social media didn't have a business model for a very long time. It wasn't until Facebook said, you know what, let's take that old joke about advertising, that 50% of my advertising is wasted, I just don't know which 50%. And actually using the feedback signal of the like button, have a better value proposition for advertising. So it's a business model innovation based on a technical innovation that had been around for some time, that at least 50 people contributed to. None of them had the foresight to realize that eventual use. They were all trying to do something else, something much more tactical. And furthermore, when we spoke to them, there was a moment of hesitation in each conversation where they were not sure why we were asking about this thing, because the day that we were referring to was no different from any other day. In other words, they had a stream of tactical challenges, and yeah, that's right. In that day in 2000, I did have that particular tactical challenge, but so what? They didn't even have the sense that this was a momentous day. It's only in retrospect that we see, that was really an important step towards the evolution of the like button. So this picture of innovation emerges, which is it's social, it's not individual. It's not generally not far-sighted. You're trying to do something else, and you often bump into some accidental feature then, or more often later. Many forgotten heroes. Much transfer of credit. The people that we remember, the people that made all the money, are not necessarily the first if you trace it back. And also there's something like a language going on, because before something has a name, we can't talk about it. But if something has a measure of success, then we say, that's the like button. That's the feedback loop on social media. We give it a naming and the framing, but that doesn't happen at the beginning. At the beginning, it's more like well, in the case of Yelp, who was probably like the first company to pull all these things together into one button with all of the features we associate with the like button. Well, what were they trying to do? They were simply trying to, in desperation, encourage users to submit restaurant reviews, because what they tried previously wasn't working. So in desperation, they tried something else, which is, well, let's give them a digital pat on the back. Let's give them some recognition. And so serendipity, tactical problems, many authors, many jumps. This is the picture of innovation that innovation emerges. And if that is the reality of innovation, then you would presumably conduct your innovation rather differently than if everything were foreseeable and a master plan and a single company and a single genius inventor could do the job.
Well, I've always been very suspicious of that perspective on innovation, and something that I've always been struck by, and I guess more so recently, is how much of innovation is really the outcome of tinkering. If you think about it, the transistor was not the end state that the inventors of it insisted on. They were just looking for a better way of dealing with vacuum tubes.
Right.
And I mean, many of these other groundbreaking innovations have that quality. And it leads me to sort of wonder if a lot of what we hear about disruptive innovation, for example, is a bit misleading in that, in retrospect, we can see that it was disruptive innovation. But at the moment, people were just trying to problem solve something they were encountering.
Right. I mean, of course, stories have their uses. I mean, sometimes it's useful to simplify, and I think there's something comforting about a story with a hero and a brilliant insight and great foresight. But it's rarely true. In fact, there was after we finished the book, there was a major scientific study that showed that 70% of scientific papers actually contain claims that were not anticipated in the grant proposal which funded the research. And of course, researchers have every incentive to talk about the possible groundbreaking implications of their research in their grant proposal. So in science, even, and in not just in individual cases, but in a more widespread sense, we can't always anticipate, and that leads to a very different. Were you to embrace that leads to a very different sort of conception of innovation. It would say, it may not happen within the boundaries of your company, so be very externally oriented. It may say, don't have grand schemes, solve the next problem in front of you, but be alert to unintended consequences. It may say, don't expect it to happen overnight. Be patient, because this thing will likely evolve. It may say, it may imply, employ a diversity of minds, because it's only by passing through different minds and different experience sets that somebody adds the next bell or whistle to the invention. And of course, the like button was not one and done. Even naming something sort of suggests finality, but the whole question of digital feedback it's still evolving. It's evolving. Initially, it evolved at the level of technical problems, and then Facebook's diffusion of the like button was really a business model innovation, not a sort of a technical innovation. It was an innovation at a high level. And right now, if you look very closely at your favorite AI tools, you'll see that they have like buttons, and so that's a very different proposition potentially, isn't it? Using your feedback to answers from an AI algorithm to further train either the algorithm or how it presents its collective knowledge to you. So that's a totally different functionality to the like button. We have we actually already have technologies that could not require you to say how you feel about something. We have Neuralink technology from Elon Musk that already has medical applications, and so it's possible that we don't need to ask you what you like. We may know at some point what you like, which is a little scary, but may also have some uses. And we already have technology which can analyze video feeds like the one we have today, and look at the involuntary facial muscle movements, and again detect whether you like something or whether you have contempt for something without asking you. And of course, each of these has tremendous potential functional applications and also potentially scary side effects, which is one of the final chapters in the book. We look at the regulatory innovation that's required to capitalize on the benefits without sort of getting into the disbenefits of new technologies. And boy, we're going to see that in a big way with AI.
Absolutely. So I'd love to dig into the whole advertising model because I'll show my hand on. I think at the moment we're in the middle of this just massive advertising bubble. And there's some reasons for that. The one is that there's this belief that the person placing the programmatic ad actually can count on it getting to the intended audience. And I think there was a study by, I want to say it was Deloitte, that looked at something like 276,000 ads that were placed, and they could only trace end to end about 11% of them. The rest of them just kind of went off into the ether and nobody could really trace them. The second assumption is that seeing an ad influences behavior. And that's not necessarily true, because what if you intended to do that anyway, and you saw the ad, but you were headed there anyway? So there was a really interesting study that was done of eBay, which had a spat with one of its programmatic advertisers. I think it was MSNBC, and they just stopped. They stopped all programmatic advertising against the search term eBay. And this professor out in Berkeley said, "Whoa, opportunity for a naturally occurring experiment." And he asked eBay if they would share their data from before and after this happened. And what they found was the hits to eBay, the landing on the search term eBay with the programmatic ads was kind of like at that level. And then the programmatic ads stopped and it dipped a little bit, and then it went right back to that level. So it turns out, Martin, that if you and I are putting the term eBay into our browsers, that's actually where we intend to go. So the advertising actually made no difference. And there's all kinds of other complications. But I just wonder if this whole thing is just a bubble.
Well, I think that my view would be that maybe overstating it. It's more of an evolution. I mean, relative to the days where we didn't know whether anyone was even seeing the advert, and we couldn't really it would be very expensive and cumbersome to segment even into 4 segments. Say, I mean, I think the like button tells us who claims to like something. I like the person or the content. We now have that signal in a very granular way. And I guess we know from Cambridge Analytica that information is at least good enough to pervert a democratic election. So there's some extra signal, some extra efficiency in this feedback loop. I mean, it's not surprising, really. Feedback loop, using a very familiar human gesture, makes advertising more effective. And it's the basis for the digital advertising proposition. Is it perfect? No, because of course humans are very sophisticated and we have agency. So when I say I like something, could it mean that I like that thing? Absolutely. Could it mean 10 other things? Absolutely. It could mean, "Oh, Rita, I'd like to curry favor with you." It could mean, "I want you to think that I like that," because it would, I don't need to incur the inconvenience of insulting you, but I actually don't like it. It could mean preference and affiliation are 2 closely related concepts, and you see them in the word like. Like, I mean, I like that. I have a preference for that content. It can mean I am like you. I affiliate with you. Homophily. And so I might be saying, "Rita, I'm not really commenting on the content. I feel I'm a bit like you. I feel like I want to belong to your tribe." It could be deliberately deceptive. It could be bordering on criminal. I mean, we because we spent too long researching the book, we had a lot of material that we cut out of it. But we did some interesting work researching like factories. You can actually buy millions of likes, and of course that led to an algorithmic arms war, because if all of the likes came from Columbia University on a Tuesday afternoon, it's a little suspicious. So we have algorithms to detect, sort of manufactured likes, which are worth money, because the money changes hands based upon the number of likes the different offerings accumulate. And then we have the effect on the advertising industry was rather profound and is still playing out, because we had not only digital advertising and new metrics, but we had even more ambitious metrics that do trace things through to sales. Because if you've got a completely digital supply chain, you don't have to rely on preference as a predictor of sales. You can rely on sales as a predictor of sales. We have algorithms, what Alibaba calls quadruple loop learning algorithms. So the algorithm learns not only what you potentially like, but which new categories of you're beginning to like, the emergence of liking. They can measure your response to novelty, which is if I present you with new stuff, do you carry on doing the old thing, or are you a curious person? And they have algorithms which self-optimize so that they learn those three things more and more effectively with every cycle. And then we have the emergence of the influencer community. The most exotic part of the book for me was my research with so-called influencers, and influencers meaning 16-year-olds that make dance videos or lip sync videos in their bedroom with cheap consumer electronics equipment that may have for instance, we spoke to a dancer called Michael Lee, who's a young dancer who had a following of 50 million sort of loyal followers, and he had an income of millions of dollars a year. And why is that a significant development? Because we may not believe the big corporation, but we might believe a young person that's that's very like us. So I think now that journey will be infinite, because we're quirky. We're humans. We have agency. We can say we like something. It may be true, may not be true. We may change our minds. We may want to like something, but actually there may be enormous inertia in our behavior. That's why I think advertising is a very sophisticated business.
It is indeed. It reminds me a bit of the mistake McDonald's made. Years and years ago, they went to consumers and they asked consumers, well, what would you like at a McDonald's? And the consumers, to a person said, oh, what we would like at a McDonald's is healthy options that, they're not fatty and greasy and all this stuff. And so they spent millions inventing this thing called the McLean burger. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes, sir. Oh, yes, and the McSalads too. Would you? It was almost like, when you say question the questionnaire, you have to ask, what is true versus how likely are you to be hijacked by an answer which people want you to believe that isn't actually true. I think that happens in elections. If people want to vote for somebody that is a little unpopular, they will often lie about who they're going to vote for. So the exit polls, I think, around Margaret Thatcher were particularly unpredictive, because people didn't want to own up who they were going to vote for. I believe that Walmart shopping is similar. People may say, do you shop at Walmart or local shops with local families and local family businesses? People will say, oh no, I shop at the local shops, and they say, excuse me, I've got to run to Walmart. They aspire to certain values, they may not practice them. And so that's an additional complexity, which is, I guess it's a bit like a diet. Do I intend to diet? Yes. Will I stick to my diet? The science says absolutely not. There are things about ourselves that we don't know. It's not just an issue of deception.
Well, the amount of unconscious behavior that goes into it is just stunning. So I love this picture in the book, and I think it's by your co-author, right? The original sketch with the like button. I don't know how well you can see it here, but which I thought was fascinating, and that was from what?
2005.
2005. Fascinating.
Actually, that was the trigger for the book. I'd had a little bit of an argument at the World Economic Forum with this Bob Goodson, who founded an analytics company, and friction turned into love at some point, and we decided, you're actually quite an interesting guy, and let's get together for coffee and get to know each other a bit better. So we got together in Mill Valley in California for coffee, and we're just making conversation, didn't know each other that well, and he shared that we were sharing a bit about ourselves, and he shared that he was an avid hoarder. He compulsively collects everything, a record of everything, train tickets since he was 10 years old and so on. And he was moving from Silicon Valley to the UK. And just to make conversation, I said, well, you must be having fun and trouble with your boxes of hoarded stuff then. And he said, oh yeah, you wouldn't believe it. And so he pulls out something from one of these boxes, a sketchbook, and it opens at this page. And I looked at the date on it. And as I think one of the things I built for my last book, The Imagination Machine, was a napkin gallery where we collected in the first sketches of innovations that changed the world. So when Bob showed me this, I thought, oh, must have that in the napkin gallery. So I was sort of a little bit tuned into it, and I looked at the date, and I couldn't remember exactly when Facebook rolled out the like button, I thought Facebook had probably invented the like button, and I sort of had the idea it was somewhere around 2010. In fact, it was 2009, and this was 2005. And so I said to my new friend Bob, Bob, you saying you invented the like button? And he said, no, of course not. Well, maybe. So the half-hour coffee conversation turned into a whole day of conversation. We were thrown out of one restaurant after another, and we ended up in a sushi restaurant in Sausalito, which was the latest restaurant to stay open. And by the time we finished talking, we had an outline for a book, and we were sort of hooked on the mystery. But it turns out that Bob probably didn't invent the like button, but we don't know for sure, because it sort of depends on exactly what you mean by a like button. If you mean a digital voting function that didn't trigger a page refresh, then it probably goes to a site that you may recall called Hot or Not. One of the early uses of the social web was to say, is my student friend hot or not? And people would vote on each other's appearance. And that was a difficult technical problem, because it wouldn't be fun if in the process of doing that, you got a 20-second page refresh. So the technical question was, could you do that inside the browser, and JavaScript browsers were not intended to do local processing of this sort. And a guy called James Hong that we interviewed for the book, the founder of Hot or Not and a serial Silicon Valley entrepreneur. So, he invented that aspect of it. So different people had different contributions, but Bob's sketch was certainly one key milestone, because it all came together then. Although I later learned that in some ways it was very prescient, but it's actually not what Yelp. He was employee number one at Yelp. It wasn't what Yelp did. Yelp went for not the thumbs up and the thumbs down button, but they went for a multi icon arrangement where it was hot, funny, cool. I'm blanking now, but hot, funny, cool, or something like this. And while the world, because of Facebook, sort of converged, as language often converges, on like equals thumbs up, more recently we've seen a re-divergence towards the original Yelp model of multiple like buttons. So if you go on LinkedIn, you've got 5 or 6 choices. If you go on Facebook now, you've got 5 or 6 choices with different emotions. You can express, amazement or embarrassment and congratulation and all sorts of emotions. Hearts, yeah.
Well, another interesting thing that I thought was related to neurology, right? Which is at one point it was very popular to have both the thumbs up for I like this, but also a thumbs down for don't like this content.
Yes.
And most of the major platforms no longer offer that option. And
that's right.
For that was interesting.
It is, because if you were trying to capture the smallest signals that would have the highest value to users, probably something to do with approval, like and thumbs down, might be a logical choice. And indeed, many sites went there. But when the business model of the attention economy emerged, which is I'll give you free email or free communications with your friends, but in return I will use the information you're inadvertently sharing, like what content you like. I as a platform will use that information to sell targeted advertising, a new value proof for advertising. Once that innovation occurred in 2009 with Facebook, then it became about not losing the attention, maximizing the attention of users. And so I guess quite logically, it focused on the thumbs up, and most people lost their thumbs down button. I believe that YouTube was one that didn't. But on the other hand, we also interviewed the founder of YouTube, and one of the interesting things there is that they have a like button because people expected it, but it actually was not the metric they used to target content. So they use watch times. How many seconds did you watch the video as their prime signal, not the like button. The like button and the the dislike button were there originally just because people expected them. It had become an established convention in digital language. Mm-hmm. So pressing that like button really wouldn't do much for your advertising proposition.
Interesting. Huh. So I'd like to go back to this idea of manufacturing sentiment.
Yes.
Because there's some recent work that's come out that sort of says there are these bot farms, right, where actually they're not even computers, they're actual phones with actual IP addresses that are looked after by armies of people in in various dark corners of the world, but that they are actually using these to manufacture sentiment. And one of the most interesting experiments I thought was the exact same posts were posted on TikTok and posted on Instagram. And the suspicion was that that there was a government behind it, because the TikTok one generated multiple orders of more sort of reactions, refreshes, reposts, and that kind of thing than the Instagram one. Exact same content. And I thought that was interesting. Manufactured sentiment, I mean, that has big implications.
Yes. Well, like any other technology, I mean, as I've been speaking to people about the book, many people are just interested in how it, the facts and the stories, and but everything has become political nowadays, and so a very strong strand of conversation is the technology good or bad, which I find a very problematic question, because it separates the technology from the humans that use the technology. This particular technology is a human technology. The humans evolved to be able to do social learning. It's our superpower is probably not the opposable thumb that the primates show to each other with a like gesture. It's probably the capacity for social learning, which means the ability not to have to jump off the cliff to find out it's not a good idea, the ability to watch somebody else do it, or even hear a story about somebody doing it to learn. And that requires certain things to be hardwired in the brain. And that's behaviors and brain chemistry. So the behaviors is preference for mild hierarchy, not the violence-dominated hierarchies of the animal kingdom, but choosing who to learn from. And of course, the like button has a counter. This person is very liked, and so you may want to learn from them. And then another one is homophily, which is learning from people like me, because their learnings are probably going to be applicable to me. And that's hard, and that's evolved into brain chemistry. So when the science says that the dopamine release from liking something online is exactly the same as being liked, and that is exactly the same brain chemistry as liking and being liked in real life. So it's a human technology. Now, of course, we can abuse it. I mean, undoubtedly, there's major cyber activity by governments. There was, I think, the Cambridge Analytica story about the perversion of an election. We saw this a little bit. One of the things being, analytical nerds was we wanted to figure out how many likes are there per day. And there is no source for that. So we had to construct a big model. And no matter how many cross-checks we did, the number just seemed unreasonably big. When we thought about, a person and online behavior of humans, there was it was in excess of that. And so our thesis is that's probably bots liking things. And so actually, it wasn't in time for the book, but I'm probably going to dig a little bit further into that to find out whether that's like most of what we see or a little bit of what we see. But artificiality is absolutely part of this in many ways. There's manufactured likes. We have manufactured influencers. So as you probably know, I can go online and I can find a human lip syncer or makeup artist or whatever kids are watching. But also I can buy a subscription to a Spanish cyber model. I can get a cyber girlfriend or a cyber influencer, and these technologies are now compelling enough that people buy subscriptions to them. So you can imagine this world which may actually be the world we live in, where bots are liking bots, and the humans are a little bit involved too, but a lot of what happens is driven by bots, and that in turn drives an entire new industry. We found this exotic ecosystem of players that wouldn't have existed 10 years ago, like farms, talent agencies for influencers, business essentials for influencers, state cyber farms, and also second and third order security firms, which is people designing the algorithms to defeat the algorithms, to detect the bots and exclude the bots from the sites. There's a very interesting unit which is part of Google called Jigsaw, who is dedicated just to cyber threats, and so they go fishing in all sorts of war zones and sort of nefarious foreign powers, trying to figure out what are the state-sponsored cyber militants doing? What's their new thing, and how are they using that thing, and how could they counteract that thing? So it even gets mixed up with national security. It's tiny, dozen lines of JavaScript code essentially change so many things in the world that it's very difficult to attribute causality.
Yeah. Well, you have a whole chapter in the book on unintended consequences, which is a topic I've been fascinated by forever. So for those of you who may be just joining us, I'm with Martin Reeves, director of the Bruce Henderson Institute at BCG, and we're talking about, among other things, his book with Bob Goodson on the like button and the impact that it's had on many things. So if you don't mind, I'd love to switch gears a little bit.
Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about state of strategy today, because
yes.
I'm just fascinated that, this idea of transient competitive advantage, that advantages don't last. A lot of the themes that you raise in one of your previous books, Your Strategy Needs a Strategy, which I recommend all the time. Kind of where are we? What's your view of what the cutting edge is?
This is, I guess this is a very live issue for me because, let's start with what is strategy, because strategy has become many things. It's become an adjective that you can apply almost to anything. But if strategy is some systematic pattern of thought or action that can bias the probability of favorable business outcomes, then it's not just a plan. It can be all sorts of things. It could be an influence strategy, a way of collaborating that taps into other people's IP and so on. So I think strategy is diversifying is one headline, which is it's not just planned, it's all of these other things. We have a zoo of different types of strategy, which that book, Your Strategy Needs a Strategy, is about. I think we have an unfortunate divergence between academics and practitioners. So the Strategic Management Society, the professional body of strategists, their ideal has always been to have as many consultants and practitioners as academics, and the discipline technically in the hands of SMS is called strategic management, which implies that it's an applied discipline. So you'd need to have the practitioners there for it to be a valid applied discipline, like medicine or engineering. But there's been this divergence. Which is unfortunate, because I think practitioners have never needed new ideas in strategy more. We're faced with the politicization of strategy, changes in globalization, which has been a major drivers of growth in recent years. We're faced with the functionality of AI versus the potential competitive advantage or not with AI. So there are lots of issues where we actually do need new frameworks and new thoughts. So I'm trying to help build a bridge between these divergent communities, and it's pretty hard. One way of answering your question is I have what I call push topics, which is things maybe nobody agrees with me, but I think they're going to be important tomorrow. And there are pull topics where CEOs actually say, I really need something on this. And my top two pull topics right now are areas of strategy that we don't really have textbooks for. One of them is the politicization of everything. So tariffs and China and decoupling and globalization. I mean, that's probably number one, and a close number two is AI. Like who's going to benefit? Yes, AI can do wonderful things, but who's going to capture value? And we're all using the same tools, trained by the same data. So does that mean even more transient advantage, or does that mean that somebody's going to be advantaged? And how do I think about that question? So I think that's all very exciting as a strategist, because the last thing a strategist wants to do is to think about yesterday's problems with very well-established tools.
Absolutely, I would agree. So I guess two things that I've been thinking about a lot are if you by the perspective that Carlota Perez has forwarded, which is that we've got these really long cycles in capitalism, which are, somewhat alike. There are these phases, right? So you've got some new thing, some old thing starts to reach the end of its ability to continue to deliver growth. And then capital goes looking for some new thing, finds it, something comes out, makes a bubble. And then you have this period that we're in at the moment, which is this sort of installation turning point where the old thing hasn't quite gone away yet, but the new thing hasn't quite completely penetrated what we're doing. And if you think the era that we've just come from, where a lot of traditional ideas and strategy were developed, which is, mass markets, petroleum-based energy, suburbs, automobiles, highways, that whole thing. And that was all created, I guess, with the beginning of mass manufacturing, in the early 1900s. And if you think about it, so many of our institutional rules, so the very laws of incorporation, generally accepted accounting standards, what is a company, and they all come from that sort of technological regime. And yet we're moving into this digital regime where so much of the assets on the books of even large publicly traded companies are now intangible, where you're seeing products being replaced by services, where you're seeing digital beginning to take, and you talked about influencers, right? The unit of value creation is now even individuals or small teams. And it kind of raises for me, like, what's the corporate form of the future going to be? Are we really going to need megalithic corporations when you could have ecosystems of sort of constellations pulling together to create outcomes that people are willing to pay for? It's just mind-blowing. And I think in a way your book kind of fits into that, because it's this whole flow of who do we believe, what's influence, what creates value. If a value isn't a physical thing you can drop on your foot, but value is how something makes me feel, or how how reputable I think something is, or how much I want to listen to something. It just changes the equation of traditional strategy, looking at your position in an industry is what determines your fate.
Right. I mean, I think it's a bit like human history in that we have emotions and instincts which are perfectly evolutionarily optimized for running around the savannah, but not necessarily modern urban life. The same thing is true of corporations. I think we have this, industrial revolution model where, taking an educated workforce and motivating them to do, standardized work and organizing that through the mechanism of the corporation. It's not quite that bad, but institutions have a huge inertia. It's a somewhat accurate description. In the meantime, almost everything about business has already changed, right? We have digital business, we have ecosystems, we have globalization, we have politicization, we have the environment becoming not just a major values issue, but a major business issue. If you look at the real estate market right now and uninsurable properties and so on, it's an economic phenomenon. It's not just a moral or a philosophical phenomenon. And I'd argue that we haven't caught up with all of that, but it's going to change even more, because I find the way we talk about AI to be quite a misleading framing in some ways, because we ask the question, what can the technology do? As if there's this complete separation between humans that use technology and technology. And the only question is, what can the technology do? I think the technology is created by humans, will be purposed by humans, will be necessarily complemented by humans, because we only we can specify the purpose towards which the AI is contributing. Only we can qualify the ethics of what to do. I think still human brains are much better at handling problems like framing. What is the question? The question, what is the question, is a very human sort of question, a very fuzzy and important question. And so therefore, I prefer to think about collective learning technologies or collective intelligence technologies. I'm talking about the same technologies, but I'm talking about the combination of the technology and the context, i.e., how the corporation will get rewired, how will decisions be made, and what will the humans do, and what will the AI do, and how will the interface between the two work? And given the complexity of those systems, how will we govern such systems? How will we know whether it's fit for purpose? There have already been some major stories about companies relying on very complex technologies. The model ceases to work, but it's so complicated that nobody noticed. So there's a sort of a new sort of cyber governance problem there. So I call all of that the bionic corporation. The combination of algorithms and humans, and the redesign of the corporation through that lens, which probably 5 years ago would have sounded like something a bit wacky, but now is a very real problem. I have a lot of companies beginning to talk about that. So again, you could experience that as a victim, as a very confusing set of phenomenon, or you could say, change as an opportunity for strategic innovation and advantage. That disequilibrium is the opportunity to figure it out before somebody else does. So I personally find all of that very, very exciting. So I feel like I'm in a very I want to ask you whether you feel the same way, but I feel like I'm in a very exciting profession that's questioning its fundamentals, and rightly so.
So that sparks two thoughts for me. So one is, if we think about the last sort of 100 years, I mean, in human living memory, the route to higher productivity has always been industrialization and manufacturing, the units of output per unit of input, that sort of equation. And what I'm wondering now is, do we need a really radically different way of thinking about what productivity even is when we're thinking about human systems, systems of care, education, healthcare, housing, things that have experienced massive inflation, in recent history. And maybe what AI does is it starts to make those things more accessible, but that requires a really different way of measuring what output really is, right? So if you imagine the same cost of providing the thing, but the quality is massively greater, say in education, wouldn't that be a really interesting way to kind of rewire that whole system?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know the answer there, but I do think it's a really important and interesting question. And so I ran a sort of a simulation in the St. Gallen Forum where we tried to think ahead as to the role of the corporation in the future, factoring in those sorts of variables. So in other words, thinking about scenarios of if we had abundance, like if essentially we solved the economic problem of shortage, and we have different problems. We have a problem of the sustainability of the planet and things like this, but the producing the daily goods, the things we need to live was not the problem. What would be the role of corporations? There's I think a plausible scenario of what if, just like bacteria in a conical flask, I mean, when you reach a certain density, the growth plateaus. So this hockey stick we've had since the Industrial Revolution, nobody said that it will continue forever. And Aristotle said, maximization problems blow up. He didn't trust maximization problems. And so maybe if growth plateaued or necessarily slowed down, what would prosperity look like in a low growth economy? I think another interesting one is inequality to do with technology. I mean, if AI eliminated all routine work, I mean, that may sound in aggregate like a good thing, but if that left a few trillionaires and then most of us without a job, how would society cope with that? That's a not just an economic problem, that's a political problem. So how do we think through that one? And so how we did this experiment is, rather than looking at trends, because a trend tends to be the logic of, let me keep everything the same and just change this one thing. I think to change everything, to imagine different scenarios, actually science fiction is the better route, because imagined futures have to be coherently different. And so we took a bunch of science fiction films, and we asked the question, what is the implied vision of the corporation in this film? And then we said, what is the dystopian version of that? What is the utopian version of that? And standing in the present, how would we bias things towards the utopian version? Then we got all the groups together that each looked at a different film, and we discussed which scenarios were most likely, and what would be the most no regret moves now, and where would we need deep political change to achieve these different scenarios. And it was a bunch of very down-to-earth business people, and they found this all extremely plausible. Not necessarily on the time scale of their next annual plan, but certainly on the time scale of what will my kids be doing.
Super. Were there any really counterintuitive things that struck?
Well, there are a couple of sort of interesting ideas for me. I mean, one of them was the idea of the, you might call it the philanthropic corporation. So supposing that we didn't need corporations and jobs, supposing that we gave everybody a universal income because technology was such that we could, provide the essentials. It might be the case that one of the problems we have is lack of structure and purpose in lives. So I may get my bread, but I may not have a sense of purpose if I don't have a job, because work does many things. And psychologically, it provides us with a learning path. We spend a lot of our time, we may bowl alone, but we all still go to the company together, spending increasing amounts of time at work. So it provides socialization, it provides structure, it provides some sort of purpose. And supposing the corporations mainly existed to provide that structure, not because they were in a primary sense, economically necessary. That's an interesting future to think about. I didn't anticipate that one. I guess another one would I guess I was surprised that if you think through these scenarios, often politics and leadership become the bottleneck. You can imagine something being possible, and you can imagine, a solution to get the best out of that situation. Say the scenario that I just mentioned. But if you say, well, what would stop it happening? It's often leadership and politics and institutional inertia. So it becomes a change problem. So I think in a way this is the problem we just talked about the the rewriting, the redesign of the corporation, writ large, the corporation in society.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and one that I think is absolutely fascinating. Goodness, time is flying. So in terms of what's happened with the book since it came out, so the book is like the button that changed the world, for those of you who are recently gathering it. So you've been in HBR, you had MIT writing about it. You're doing a LinkedIn series. Is that correct?
Yes. It's going well, but it's not an easy time to sell a book about innovation. Actually, I found that the journalists mainly want to talk about tariffs and AI right now. Sort of, an unfortunate point in the news cycle. So I think we worked. My colleagues worked very hard to get us on the map, and I think so far it's going very well. But it's required an enormous amount of work to grab attention, because it's not the main topic of the day. We could argue that it should be, but it's not the main topic of the day. Probably one of the most interesting events so far is, what is interesting for me. I'm an introvert. I actually basically don't enjoy the marketing process that much. It's more the research and the writing that's interesting for me, and the individual conversations with business leaders. But one thing that's really interesting is the book acquiring a life of its own. There's the book that you intend to write, and then there's the unintended consequence, which is the way that the world accepts the book or not. And so there are some pleasant and interesting surprises, some serendipities in the way that the book's playing out. So I guess I hadn't really thought about it this way, but in a sense, there's a part of the book which is about language and communication and how that intersects with business. And so last night I did an event at Planet Word, which I hadn't heard of, but it's the only museum of language in America. And so I did a fireside chat with Tom Friedman from the New York Times, and we just talked about the intersection of language and business. Why do we name things and frame things the way that we do, and the power of gestural language and so on. And fascinating. It's quite strange that the author of the book is surprised at the way the book is interpreted, and you get dragged into. So it's still a journey of discovery, basically, that keeps it interesting for me. And but I think I'm not primarily in the business of writing. I mean, I'm in the business of originating ideas that are going to be useful to business leaders. And so the real value in the book is it's not so much the promotion of the book; it's the conversations with business leaders about what they can do with the ideas. So that's just beginning to unfold, and that's the most important part of the journey for me. And the early signs are that there are two themes which seem to be like they might be hot. One of them is how does innovation really work? And if I accept the serendipitous view of innovation, is my stage gate mechanism and my highly orchestrated corporate process the right one? That's sort of one hot question. And the other one is the sort of historical learnings question. Given that we created the complete arc, starting with cave paintings of hands with the like button through to Cambridge Analytica and everything in between, which part of that can we use to give us some foresight into how AI may unfold? Because companies I think every company right now is sort of sitting there thinking, do we buy the hype? Do we invest? Do we cautiously experiment? Do we observe? Where do we start? How could this come back to bite us? What are the risks? And I think there are some lessons, because there are some. You mentioned Carla Perez. I mean, I think there are some strong historical patterns of how technologies unfold that we can alert ourselves to.
I absolutely agree. Well, Martin Reeves, what a pleasure to chat to you. The book that we've been talking about, this is most recent, but those of you who are not familiar with Martin's work, I love The Imagination Machine. I think that was a great book. And there's a wonderful display, which is still on the website, called The Napkin Gallery. And if any of you are innovation junkies, go visit it. It's really great. It has like the first on the napkin picture of many of the innovations we today take for granted. And then going back even further, I'm a big fan of your Strategy Needs a Strategy. So thank you for providing all that.
Thanks, Rita. As interesting and wide-ranging as always. Thank you.
Indeed. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a
See
lot.
you next time, everybody.